The galaxy watches in terror as humans enter battle. Part 5. 6 months after the Battle of the Thousand Stars, the galaxy was healing. The swarm was gone, hunted to extinction by human cleanup crews who made sure not a single creature remained. The last swarm organism died in a distant nebula, killed by a human missile that tracked it across 3 star systems. The galaxy was safe, but it was changed forever. Coalition Central held a memorial ceremony in the Vale Nebula, where the final battle had taken place. A massive wall floated in space, built from dark stone quarried from 800 worlds. On this wall were carved 340,000 names. Every human who died in the war, ships from every coalition species gathered around the memorial. Dalla stood on her ship's observation deck watching the ceremony. She had been changed by the war. She understood violence now. She understood sacrifice. She understood that peace sometimes required warriors. Ambassador Yuna spoke at the ceremony. Her voice was broadcast across the galaxy. These names represent the greatest sacrifice any species has ever made for another. Humans didn't know us. They had no reason to love us. But they died for us anyway. She paused, looking at the wall of names. They taught us that survival requires strength. That peace is not the absence of warriors, but the presence of those willing to protect it. They became monsters so we wouldn't have to. On Earth, Admiral Jehoon watched the ceremony from his home. He had retired after the war, as had many human officers. The war had taken too much from all of them. He was older now, tired. The weight of command had aged him beyond his years. His door chimed. Lieutenant Boram Kim entered. She had survived the war and chosen to stay in the service. "Sir, there's a message from Coalition Central." Jehoon read it and sighed. "They want us to train their militaries. Will you accept?" Boram asked. "What choice do we have?" "We showed them the necessity of strength. Now we have to teach them how to use it responsibly." He looked out the window at Earth's peaceful sky. "We created warriors out of pacifists. Now we have to make sure they don't become what we are." "What we are, sir?" Jehoon smiled sadly. "People who know war too well. People who can never truly have peace because we're always preparing for the next fight." Across the galaxy, coalition species were transforming. Military academies opened on every major world. Young people who had never considered violence now trained in combat. The Thelonian forges ran constantly, producing weapons and armor. The Crystalline Collective taught quantum physics for military applications. But something interesting happened. The coalition didn't just copy human methods. They adapted them to their own values. They built weapons, yes, but they also built better shields and defensive systems. They learned tactics, but they emphasized protecting civilians over destroying enemies. They were becoming warriors, but warriors shaped by 10,000 years of peace. Warriors who valued life even as they learned to take it. Dalla became a professor at the new Coalition Military Institute. She taught history, specifically the human intervention and what it meant. Her students were from dozens of species, all eager to learn. One day a young student asked, "Professor, do you think humans are good or evil?" Dalla considered the question. "Neither. Humans are survivors. They do what's necessary. Good and evil are luxuries of peacetime. In war, there's only survival or death." "But they use terrible weapons," another student said. "They killed without mercy." "They did," Dalla agreed. "And 2 trillion beings on Central lived because of it. 4 billion on SciFiPrime died because we chose mercy over action. Which is worse? Using terrible weapons to save lives or refusing to use them and letting billions die?" The class fell silent, wrestling with the question that had no easy answer. The Coalition Council debated humanity's place in the galaxy. Some wanted restrictions on human weapons. Others wanted full integration. The debate lasted months. Finally, a compromise was reached. Humans would join the Coalition, but Earth would maintain independent military authority. They would share technology and training, but human weapons of mass destruction would remain under Earth's control. It was a strange arrangement, but it worked. The galaxy trusted humans to protect them. They just didn't trust themselves with human weapons yet. On the memorial wall in Vale Nebula, new visitors arrived every day. People from across the galaxy came to see the names, to understand the price of their survival. Many left offerings, flowers from 100 worlds, stones from distant planets, letters of thanks written in 1,000 languages. Admiral Soyon visited the wall often. She had survived the war but lost most of her fleet. She stood before the name of Captain Doyun Han, the pilot who had sacrificed himself to deploy the quantum weapon. "Did you know," a voice said behind her, "that his children visit this place every year?" Soyun turned to see an older Silverian woman. "Who are you?" "I'm Ylmara. My sister was the High Priestess of SciFiPrime. She died believing peace was always the answer." The woman touched the wall. "I thought she was a fool. Now I think she was half right. Peace is the answer, but sometimes you need to fight to achieve it." "Your sister's death taught the galaxy a hard lesson," Soyun said. "Yes, that good intentions without strength are worthless." Ylmara looked at Soyun. "Thank you for being strong when we couldn't." Captain Minho Choi took a position training coalition officers. He was patient with his students but demanding. "You can't be half a warrior," he told them. "Either commit to protecting your people with everything you have, or step aside for someone who will." His students learned quickly. They had seen what happened to worlds that refused to fight. They had seen SciFiPrime. They understood now. One evening, Minho sat with his fellow human instructors. Sergeant Tae-young was there, along with a dozen others. They were drinking, remembering friends who didn't come home. "Do you think it was worth it?" Tae-young asked. "All the lives we lost?" Minho was quiet for a moment. "Ask the 2 trillion people on Central. Ask the families we saved. Ask the children who'll grow up because we fought. But we lost so many. We did, and we'd do it again." Minho raised his glass. "To the dead, who bought life with their own." They all drank to that. A year after the war ended, Admiral Jihoon received a visitor. It was Dala, the researcher who had observed human forces during the war. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "You saved us all." Jihoon shook his head. "We just did what we know how to do, fight." "No," Dala said. "You did more than that. You taught us that peace isn't weakness, but peace without the ability to defend it is. You showed us that protecting life sometimes requires taking it. These are hard truths, but they're truths we needed to learn." "And what will you do with these truths?" Jihoon asked. "Build a better galaxy. One that remembers the cost of peace. One that maintains strength but doesn't seek violence. One that honors both the warriors and the peacekeepers." She smiled. "We're calling it the New Coalition, and we want humans to help lead it." Jihoon looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, human defense stations orbited coalition worlds. Human instructors trained alien soldiers. Human engineers helped build weapons and shields. Humanity had integrated into the galaxy not as conquerors but as guardians. "We'll help," he said finally, "but on one condition. You never forget what it cost. Every time you deploy a weapon, remember the 340,000 names on that wall. Remember that violence is a tool, not a solution. Remember that we fight so future generations won't have to." "We'll remember," Dala promised. Years passed. The new coalition thrived. They maintained strong defenses but sought peaceful solutions first. They built weapons but hoped never to use them. They trained warriors but taught them to value life. And humans remained the guardians, always watching, always ready. They didn't want another war. But if war came, the galaxy knew who would stand between them and destruction. Lieutenant Boram Kim, now a captain, stood on the bridge of her ship patrolling the galactic rim. Her sensors picked up something strange. Unknown energy signatures from beyond the galaxy. She immediately sent a report to Coalition Central. Within minutes, a response came back. "Analysis required. Possible threat. Requesting human expertise," Boram smiled. The galaxy had learned its lesson. They didn't panic. They didn't try to handle threats with peaceful words alone. They called for help immediately. Another message arrived from Earth Defense Command. "We're already mobilizing. Fleet will arrive in 72 hours. The unknown signals turned out to be a coalition exploration ship, damaged and broadcasting on unusual frequencies. False alarm. But the response had been perfect. The galaxy was ready now, ready to defend itself, ready to call for help when needed, ready to respond to threats before they became catastrophes." Boram looked at the stars and thought about the journey. The galaxy had watched in terror as humans entered battle. They had been horrified by human methods. They had questioned if the cure was worse than the disease, but now they watched with relief. Because when humans mobilized, it meant hope. It meant protection. It meant someone was willing to do the hard things so others could live in peace. The last line of Boram's log entry that night read, "The galaxy no longer watches in terror as humans enter battle. They watch in relief. Because when humans fight, it means hope remains. And as long as hope remains, peace is possible. The galaxy watches in terror as humans enter battle. Part 4. The war had been going on for 8 months. The swarm controlled a third of the galaxy now, but their advance had slowed. Human tactics and weapons had taught the coalition how to fight back, yet everyone knew the real battle was still coming. Intelligence reports confirmed the worst fears. The swarm was gathering 70% of its remaining forces for one massive strike. Their target, Coalition Central, home to 2 trillion beings. If Central fell, the coalition would collapse. Admiral Jihoon called a meeting of all fleet commanders. The holographic display showed the swarm's movements. "They're committing everything to this attack," he said. "If we lose Central, we lose the war. How many ships can we field?" asked Commander Petra of the Thelonian fleet. "Human forces, 120,000 warships," Jihoon answered. "Coalition forces, 80,000. "Against how many swarm vessels?" Petra asked, though she feared the answer. "Estimated 400,000. The room fell silent. Even with human weapons and tactics, those odds were impossible. General Hyagin stood. "The swarm has one weakness we've identified. They're a hive mind. Every ship, every creature connected through quantum frequencies. If we can sever that connection, they become mindless animals." Admiral Soyun Kang, commander of the largest human battle fleet, leaned forward. "You're talking about the theoretical quantum disruption weapon. The one that's never been tested. We've had 8 months of studying swarm communication patterns," Hyagin said. "We've identified their hive frequency. The weapon will work." "You hope it will work," Soyun corrected. "And if it doesn't?" "Then we die fighting," Jihoon said simply. "But we're going to try. Because hope is a weapon, too." While humans planned their desperate gambit, something unexpected happened across the coalition. Species that had been peaceful for thousands of years began to remember their warrior past. On the Thelonian homeworld, the ancient forges were reopened. Craftsmen who had only made art pieces for centuries now hammered out weapons. Commander Petra stood in the old armory holding a blade her ancestors had wielded 10,000 years ago. "Our people were warriors once," she said to her crew. "We can be again." The Crystalline Collective, beings of living crystal who communicated through light, shared forbidden knowledge. They had discovered quantum disruption technology 5,000 years ago and had buried it as too dangerous. Now they gave it freely to the humans. Even the pacifist Lumari species contributed. They couldn't bring themselves to kill, but they built medical stations and supply networks with incredible efficiency. "We cannot hold weapons," their leader said, "but we can hold up those who do." Dalla watched the galaxy transform. It was painful, like watching innocence die, but it was also beautiful in a way. The coalition was learning that strength wasn't evil. It was necessary. She visited the human military academy that had been set up on Coalition Central. Young aliens trained alongside human instructors. She watched a class where Sergeant Taeyong taught basic tactics. "In war, there are no fair fights," he told the mixed group of students. "Fair fights are for sports. War is about winning, period. You use every advantage, every trick, every weapon, because the enemy isn't interested in fairness. They're interested in killing you." A young Silverian student raised her hand. "But doesn't that make us like them? Like the swarm?" Taeyong shook his head. "The swarm kills because it's their nature. We kill to protect. That difference matters. We don't enjoy violence. We don't seek it out. But when it comes to us, we meet it with overwhelming force. That's not being monsters. That's being guardians." The student considered this. "So we become monsters temporarily to stop real monsters?" "Exactly," Taeyong said. "And when the battle is over, we put down the monster and become people again. That's what separates us from the enemy." Admiral Soyun finalized the battle plan. It was risky and required perfect timing. Human stealth technology would hide a small ship carrying the quantum disruption device. Captain Doyon Han volunteered to pilot it into the heart of the swarm fleet. Soyun met with Doyon in private. "You understand this is a one-way mission?" Doyon nodded. "The swarm's hive ship is in the center of their formation. I need to get within 10 kilometers to deploy the device. Their defenses are too thick. I won't make it out." "I can't order you to do this," Soyun said. "You don't have to order me. I'm volunteering." Doyon smiled sadly. "I have 2 children back on Earth. If I don't do this, the swarm reaches them eventually. At least this way I know they'll be safe." Soyun placed a hand on his shoulder. Your children will know what you did. The whole galaxy will know. The swarm fleet arrived at Coalition Central 3 days later. 400,000 bioships darkened the space around the planet. On the surface, 2 trillion beings waited in fear. Evacuation was impossible. There was nowhere to run. The human and Coalition fleet moved to intercept. 200,000 ships against 400,000. The battle would be remembered as the Battle of the Thousand Stars, because of the countless explosions that lit up space. Ji-hoon stood on his flagship's bridge. All ships, this is Admiral Park, we hold the line here. Not one swarm ship reaches Central. Humanity has fought for 10,000 years to survive. Today we fight so the galaxy can survive. All weapons free. Show them what warriors look like. The fleets collided in the space between Central and the swarm. Human railguns fired at maximum rate, their magnetic acceleration creating streams of metal that punched through swarm bioships. Fusion missiles detonated in brilliant chains of explosions. The new coalition weapons, built from human designs, added their firepower to the storm. The swarm fought back with their acid sprays and swarming tactics. Ships on both sides died in the thousands. The battle was chaos, but within the chaos was a pattern. Soyeon watched her tactical display. Every human ship was moving according to a precise dance. It looked random to the swarm, but it was carefully choreographed. Each ship's position, each attack angle, each movement was calculated. Pattern completion in 3 minutes, her tactical officer reported. The pattern was a web, and at the center of that web a hole was forming. A corridor through the swarm fleet, protected by overlapping fields of fire. Doyen's stealth ship was already moving through it. On his tiny ship, Doyen watched the human fleet sacrifice itself to give him this chance. Ships exploded around him, each one buying him another few seconds. He could hear the battle chatter on the comm, voices of soldiers dying to protect his mission. This is Delta Wing, we're hit. Completing the pattern before we go. Tiger Squadron to Central, we're breaking apart. Maintain corridor integrity. Doyen's hands gripped the controls. So many people dying for this one chance. He couldn't waste it. He reached the swarm hive ship. It was massive, the size of a moon. This was the central node of the hive mind, the creature that coordinated all others. Doyen armed the quantum disruption device. The crystalline collective had said it would sever the hive connection for about 47 seconds. 47 seconds for the combined fleet to destroy the swarm. It had to be enough. Swarm defenders finally detected his ship. They swarmed toward him. Doyen activated the device and launched it toward the hive ship. It struck the hull and burrowed inside, disappearing into the organic structure. Acid sprays hit Doyen's ship. The hull began to dissolve. He felt heat as the acid ate through the armor. His last thought was of his children safe on Earth. The quantum disruption device activated. Across the swarm fleet, the hive connection severed. For 47 seconds, 400,000 bioships became 400,000 mindless animals, each one acting on instinct alone. Now, Soyeon shouted, all ships concentrated fire. Take them down. The human and coalition fleet unleashed everything. Without coordination, the swarm couldn't defend itself. Ships that had been deadly threats became easy targets. In 47 seconds, the combined fleet destroyed 90% of the swarm. When the hive connection restored, only 30,000 swarm ships remained. They were scattered, disorganized, and facing an angry fleet that had just watched thousands of friends die. The battle became a hunt. Human ships pursued every remaining swarm vessel. Captain Minho's voice came over the comm. No survivors. We end this today. It took 6 hours to hunt down the last swarm ship. When it was destroyed, silence fell across the fleet. The Battle of the Thousand Stars was over. Coalition Central was saved. 2 trillion beings lived, but 40,000 human ships were destroyed. 200,000 humans died, including Captain Doyen Han. The galaxy watches in terror as humans enter battle. Part 3, the galaxy was splitting in two. Half the coalition species praised humans as saviors. The other half called them war criminals. Videos of the Kepler Belt battle played on every world. People watched human weapons turn living creatures into clouds of atoms. They watched antimatter explosions that violated every treaty the coalition had ever signed. Council leader Ventar called an emergency session. Admiral Ji-hoon stood before the assembled representatives of 800 worlds. The chamber was full of angry voices. You used banned weapons, shouted the Thelonian delegate. Antimatter devices are illegal. Ji-hoon's face remained calm. Illegal according to laws made during peacetime. We're at war. Your laws don't apply to weapons you never needed. You killed the swarm without mercy, another delegate said. They were retreating. They were regrouping, Ji-hoon corrected. The swarm doesn't retreat out of fear. They retreat to find easier prey. We made sure they understood there is no easy prey anymore. Ambassador Yuna stood up. The humans saved 2 million lives at Kepler Belt. How many did we save with our peaceful methods? 0. The chamber fell silent. The truth hurt, but it was truth. General Hee-jin Song, the human strategic commander, stepped forward. She activated a holographic display showing the entire galaxy. Red dots marked swarm positions. Blue dots marked coalition worlds. The swarm is adapting, she said. They're learning to avoid our main fleets. They're sending smaller groups to raid supply lines and isolated colonies. She zoomed in on a section of space. They're pushing toward Coalition Central. In 3 weeks, they'll have consumed enough worlds to build a fleet we can't stop. We need to act now. What do you propose? Ventar asked. Hee-jin pressed a button. The display changed, showing a corridor of space between the swarm and Coalition Central. We use these 12 worlds as bait. We evacuate who we can. Leave military assets that look valuable, and let the swarm concentrate their forces to attack them. The chamber erupted in anger. A delegate jumped to her feet. You want to sacrifice 12 worlds? That's 4 billion people. We evacuate 3 billion, Hee-jin said coldly. The remaining billion in remote areas. They're acceptable losses. Dalla, watching from the observer gallery, felt sick. She had grown to understand human military thinking, but this was too much. These were living beings they were discussing like numbers on a spreadsheet. Philosopher Krendall, the coalition's leading ethicist, approached Hee-jin. How can you speak of billions dying so casually? Do you feel nothing? Hee-jin met his eyes. I feel everything. Every death weighs on me. But if we don't sacrifice those billions, trillions die. War isn't about morality. It's about mathematics. We choose the option that saves the most lives, even if that choice destroys our souls. A young human soldier, Sergeant Taeyoung Lee, stood beside Hee-jin. He spoke quietly. You've had peace so long you forgot what war demands. War demands everything. Your comfort, your morals, your innocence. You pay the price or you die. There's no third option. The council voted. It was close, but survival instinct won. The evacuation of the 12 worlds began, but one world refused. SciFiPrime, a paradise planet with ancient cities and priceless culture. Their leader, High Priestess Ylara, sent a message to Coalition Central. We will not allow human military forces on our world. We choose peace over violence. The swarm will see our peaceful intent and pass us by. Ji-hoon heard the message and shook his head. They're going to die. We should force them to evacuate, Yuna said. No, Ji-hoon replied. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way. We'll save who we can when it happens. 6 days later, the swarm reached SciFiPrime. The planet's defense force used stun weapons and broadcast messages of peace. The swarm consumed the planet in 14 hours. 4 billion people died. Human rescue ships arrived during the final hours. They saved 3,000 people from the outer settlements. The rest were gone, absorbed into the swarm's biomass. The galaxy watched the recordings from SciFiPrime. They watched peaceful cities dissolve. They watched the High Priestess broadcasting her message of peace even as the swarm's acid rain fell on her temple. They watched her die still believing violence was wrong. After SciFiPrime, objections to human methods decreased. Fear was a powerful teacher. The trap was set. The 12 worlds were partially evacuated. Human and coalition forces positioned themselves in hidden locations. The swarm took the bait, sending massive fleets to consume the vulnerable targets. Commodore Junho Nam commanded the human fleet at Rim Gates, one of the bait worlds. His force was small, just 40 ships. The swarm sent 3,000 bioships to crush him. On the bridge, his crew watched the enemy approach. Sir, we're outnumbered 75-1, his first officer said. We should retreat. Junho looked at the tactical display. If the swarm broke through here, they'd reach an evacuation convoy with 2 million civilians. No retreat. We hold the line. The battle was brutal. Human ships fought with desperate courage, but numbers told the story. One by one, Junho's ships fell. After 2 hours, only his flagship remained. His crew was dead or dying. The ship's systems were failing. The swarm surrounded him, preparing to finish the job. Junho sat in his command chair and made a decision. Computer, set all fusion reactors to overload. Authorization Junho Alpha 7. The computer responded. Warning, reactor overload will destroy the ship. I know, Junho said quietly. He opened a channel to Coalition Central. This is Commodore Junho Nam. To those watching, remember this. Humans don't fear death. We fear failure. We fear letting innocents die when we could have done more. He programmed a collision course with the largest swarm vessel. You think we're monsters? You're right. We're monsters made by 10,000 years of war. But we're your monsters. We die so you don't have to. Junho's flagship accelerated. The swarm tried to destroy it, but human armor held just long enough. The ship crashed into the swarm flagship, and every fusion reactor detonated simultaneously. The explosion lit up the sector like a new sun. When the light faded, the swarm flagship was gone. So were 300 other swarm vessels caught in the blast radius, and so was Junho and his entire crew. The evacuation convoy escaped. 2 million civilians lived because 2,000 humans died. Dala watched the recording of Junho's last moments. She cried for the first time since the war began. Not because of the violence, but because she finally understood. Humans weren't monsters. They were protectors who had accepted the monster's role so others could remain innocent. The galaxy's attitude toward humans began to shift. They were still terrifying, but they were terrifying in defense of life, not destruction of it. Every human death saved countless others. Every brutal tactic had a purpose beyond cruelty. The trap worked. The swarm concentrated their forces to attack the bait worlds. Human and coalition fleets emerged from hiding and struck. It was the first major coordinated victory. The swarm lost 60% of their fleet, but they were learning. The swarm began to adapt, change tactics, spread out their forces. The war was far from over. It was only beginning to reach its peak. Jihoon stood on the bridge of his flagship looking at battle reports. Yuna approached him. Your people are dying to save us, she said. Yes, Jihoon replied. Why? You could retreat to Earth and defend only yourselves. Jihoon was quiet for a long time. Because that's not who we are. Humans fight. It's what we do. And if we're going to fight anyway, we might as well fight for something worth saving. He looked at her. Your coalition, for all its flaws, represents hope. Hope that species can live together peacefully. We've never had that. If fighting for you means our children might have it someday, then we fight. Yuna understood then. Humans weren't fighting to save the coalition. They were fighting to save the dream of what the coalition represented. A dream they had never been allowed to have themselves. The galaxy watched as humans bled for that dream. And slowly they began to bleed alongside them. The galaxy watches in terror as humans enter battle. Part 1. The galaxy had known peace for 10,000 years. Across 847 worlds, civilizations lived without war. They settled disputes with words and trade agreements. The Galactic Coalition was proud of this achievement. War was something from ancient history, a barbaric practice that evolved species had left behind. Admiral Thalvor stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Harmony. He was Centauri, a species known for their logic and diplomatic skills. His fleet of 3,000 ships patrolled the outer rim of Coalition space. It was a ceremonial duty, really. Nothing threatened the peace anymore. Then the sensors screamed. Something was tearing through the barrier at the edge of the galaxy. Thalvor watched his displays with confusion. The barrier had protected them for millions of years. Nothing could break through it, but something had. The Void Swarm emerged from the darkness between galaxies. They were organic ships, massive creatures that moved with terrible purpose. They didn't send messages. They didn't make demands. They simply consumed everything in their path. Thalvor's crew panicked as the swarm approached. He tried to remain calm. Deploy containment fields, he ordered. Activate the stun pulse array. The coalition had tools for controlling dangerous animals and managing wild creatures. Surely these would work on whatever these things were. The containment fields wrapped around the first swarm ships. For a moment, Thalvor felt hope. Then the creatures simply absorbed the energy and grew larger. The stun pulses hit them and did nothing. These beings didn't have nervous systems like anything the coalition had ever encountered. The swarm reached the fleet. What happened next would haunt the survivors forever. The organic ships released smaller creatures that attached to coalition vessels. They ate through the hulls like acid through paper. Crew members evacuated in escape pods only to watch their ships dissolve into the swarm's mass. Thalvor ordered a retreat, but it was too late. The swarm moved faster than his ships. They surrounded the fleet from all sides. In 17 minutes, 3,000 ships became wreckage. 89% of his crews were dead. Thalvor's flagship escaped because it was at the rear of the formation. He jumped to Coalition Central with his handful of surviving vessels. His hands shook as he delivered his report to the High Council. "We have no weapons against them," he said. "Everything we tried failed. They don't respond to negotiation. They don't seem to think at all. They just consume." The council chamber fell silent. These beings had forgotten what real danger felt like. They had forgotten what it meant to face an enemy that wanted them dead. Over the next weeks, the swarm consumed 7 more worlds. The coalition sent fleets with their best technology. Nothing worked. Peaceful species had no idea how to fight a war. Their weapons were designed to disable, not destroy. Their tactics were built around avoiding conflict, not winning it. Millions died, then billions. In desperation, the coalition searched their old records for anything that might help. A junior researcher named Dalla found something interesting in the forbidden archives. 200 years ago, the coalition had contacted a species in a remote system. The species was called human, and they lived on a planet called Earth. The first contact report was disturbing. Humans had been invited to join the coalition, but they refused. The contact team's notes explained why. These beings are incompatible with coalition values. They maintain weapons of mass destruction. Their entire civilization is built around conflict and competition. They view our peaceful ways as weakness. Recommend quarantine. Dalla brought the report to the High Council. The old leaders read it with growing interest. Here was a species that understood violence. Here was a species that might know how to fight. The council voted. It was close, but desperation won. They would break the quarantine and contact Earth again. Ambassador Yuna was chosen for the mission. She was Silverian, a species known for their empathy and communication skills. As her ship approached the Sol system, she felt afraid. The records painted humans as aggressive and dangerous, but the galaxy was dying. She had no choice. Earth's defense platforms locked onto her ship immediately. Weapons she couldn't identify tracked her movement. A harsh voice came through her communicator. "Unknown vessel, state your purpose or be destroyed." Yuna's translator struggled with the human language. Their words were sharp and direct. "I am Ambassador Yuna of the Galactic Coalition. I request an audience with your leaders. We need help." There was a long pause. Then, "Dock at Platform 7. Any hostile action will result in immediate termination." Yuna's ship landed at the platform. When she stepped out, she saw something that terrified her. Soldiers in armor stood at every corner. Each carried weapons that looked brutal and efficient. The walls were covered in metal, not the soft, comfortable materials coalition ships used. Everything about this place was built for war. An officer approached. He was tall for a human with dark hair and sharp eyes. His uniform was covered in symbols Yuna didn't recognize. "I am Admiral Ji-hoon Park," he said. "You have 5 minutes to explain why we should care about your coalition." Yuna explained everything. The swarm, the deaths, the desperate situation. She showed him recordings of the attacks. As she spoke, she watched Ji-hoon's face. He didn't look shocked or afraid. He looked thoughtful. When she finished, Ji-hoon was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that made Yuna's blood run cold. "You've had peace for 10,000 years, Ji-hoon said. We've had war for 10,000 years. There's a difference." He turned and walked toward a door. "Follow me. You need to see something." Yuna followed him through corridors filled with armed soldiers. They entered a massive room with screens covering every wall. Each screen showed different things: ships being built, soldiers training, weapons being tested. "This is what you don't understand," Ji-hoon said. "You forgot how to fight. We never had that luxury. Every generation of humans has known war. We've fought each other, fought our environment, fought for every bit of survival we ever had. Peace isn't our natural state. Preparation for war is." Yuna stared at the screens. Thousands of warships being constructed. Millions of soldiers ready to deploy. Weapons that could crack planets. "Will you help us?" she asked quietly. Ji-hoon looked at her. "We'll help. Not because we like you. Not because we believe in your coalition. But because if the swarm isn't stopped, they'll eventually reach Earth. And we always eliminate threats before they reach our home." He pressed a button. Alarms rang throughout the platform. "Earth Defense Force," his voice boomed through speakers everywhere. "This is Admiral Park. War Protocol Omega is now active. All forces mobilize. We have a galaxy to save. Yuna watched as humanity prepared for war. She had come seeking salvation. She feared she had unleashed something worse than the swarm, because now the galaxy would see what real warriors looked like, and that sight would terrify them almost as much as the swarm itself. The galaxy watches in terror as humans enter battle. Part 2, 72 hours after Admiral Jihoon's call to arms, the human fleet arrived at Coalition Central. Ambassador Yuna watched from the observation deck as 50,000 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel. The sight made her feel sick with fear and hope mixed together. Coalition ships were elegant, built with curves and soft lights. They looked like art pieces floating in space. Human ships looked like weapons. They were angular, covered in armor plating, bristling with guns and missile ports. They didn't belong in the peaceful galaxy. They belonged in nightmares. The Coalition High Council gathered to meet the human commanders. Yuna stood beside them as Admiral Jihoon entered with his officers. The humans moved with purpose, every step controlled and efficient. They didn't waste motion or time. Jihoon got straight to business. Show us everything you know about the swarm. The council played their recordings. Battles lost, worlds consumed, millions dead. The humans watched in silence. When it ended, Jihoon turned to his officers. Analysis? A young woman stepped forward. Her uniform identified her as Lieutenant Borum Kim. The swarm operates as a hive mind. They prioritize resource consumption over tactical advantage. They don't retreat because they don't understand preservation. Every action is about feeding. Weaknesses? Jihoon asked. They cluster their forces. They rely on overwhelming numbers. They have no concept of strategic deception. Borum paused. Sir, they fight like animals, not soldiers. Jihoon nodded. Good. Animals are easy to kill. He turned to the council. We need detailed maps of swarm positions, coalition fleet locations, and civilian population centers. We also need complete tactical control of the combined forces. Council leader Ventar hesitated. Complete control? We cannot simply hand over authority. Yes, you can, Jihoon interrupted. Because you don't know how to fight and we do. Every second you waste arguing is another 1,000 civilians dead. Decide now. The council members looked at each other with uncertainty. They had never been spoken to this way. But the recordings of the swarm's destruction played in their minds. Ventar bowed his head. The fleet is yours, Admiral. Dalla, the young researcher, was assigned to observe the human forces. She wanted to understand these warriors who had appeared to save them. She was given a position on the TDS Indomitable, Captain Minho Choi's ship. The first thing Dalla noticed was the noise. Coalition ships were quiet, peaceful. The Indomitable rumbled with the sound of machinery. Soldiers ran through corridors on training exercises. Officers shouted orders. Everything was constant motion and purpose. Captain Minho found her in the mess hall, looking lost. He sat down across from her with a tray of food. You look confused, he said. Everything here is so aggressive, Dalla said. Even eating feels like combat practice, Minho laughed. That's because it is. We eat fast so we're ready for action. We sleep in shifts so someone is always alert. We train constantly because the moment we stop, we die. He looked at her seriously. Your people forgot that life is struggle. We never had the chance to forget. But how do you live like this? Isn't it exhausting? It's all we know, Minho said. Human children grow up learning strategy through games. We study ancient battles the way you study art. Every human understands that peace is temporary. War is the default state of existence. Peace is just the gap between conflicts. Dalla felt her stomach turn. That's horrible. That's survival, Minho corrected. And right now, survival is what your galaxy needs. The first deployment came quickly. The swarm was attacking the Kepler Belt, a cluster of mining colonies with 2 million civilians. The coalition had sent a defense fleet, but they were failing. Jihoon ordered Minho's battle group to intervene. Dalla stood on the bridge as they approached the battle. She could see coalition ships firing their stun weapons and containment fields. The swarm absorbed it all and kept coming. Coalition ships were dissolving under the swarm's acid attacks. Sir, coalition fleet is down to 40% strength, an officer reported. Minho's face was calm. Weapons free. Execute attack pattern Delta 7. What happened next would replay in Dalla's nightmares forever. The Indomitable's railguns fired. These weren't stun weapons. These were chunks of metal accelerated to incredible speeds. They punched through swarm bioships like bullets through paper. The creatures exploded in sprays of organic matter. Missile batteries launched. Hundreds of fusion-tipped warheads screamed toward the swarm. They detonated in brilliant flashes, each explosion vaporizing dozens of enemy creatures. The swarm tried to cluster together for defense. That was exactly what Minho wanted. "Target the cluster," he ordered. "Antimatter device ready." Dalla grabbed his arm. "Wait, antimatter weapons are banned." "They're too destructive." Minho looked at her with cold eyes. "Banned by who?" "Your peaceful coalition." "We're not in your coalition. We're here to win." He nodded to his weapons officer. "Fire." A single missile launched. It dove into the heart of the swarm cluster. For a moment, nothing happened. Then reality itself seemed to tear apart. Matter and antimatter met and annihilated each other in the explosion of pure energy. The blast wave expanded at the speed of light. When Dalla's eyes adjusted, 40% of the swarm fleet was gone. Just gone. Turned into expanding clouds of superheated particles. The mining colonies were saved. 2 million civilians lived because the humans had done something unthinkable. The remaining swarm creatures did something the coalition had never seen them do. They retreated. They turned and fled into deep space, running from the humans. "Pursuit course," Minho ordered. "Sir, they're retreating," an officer said. "I know. We're going to make sure they tell the rest of the swarm what happens when they fight humans. Fear is a weapon too." The Indomitable chased the fleeing swarm for 3 hours, destroying every creature until none remained. When they returned to the mining colonies, the coalition fleet was still there, staring in shock. Dalla received a message from Coalition Central. She was to return immediately with her report. As she prepared to leave, Minho found her. "You're going to tell them we're monsters," he said. It wasn't a question. Dalla was quiet for a moment. "Are you?" Minho considered this. "Maybe. But we're monsters who just saved 2 million lives. Your coalition tried to save those people with kindness and failed. We saved them with violence and succeeded. You decide which approach is better." As Dalla's shuttle flew back to Coalition Central, she watched the recordings of the battle. The brutal efficiency of human weapons, the cold calculation in their tactics, the willingness to use weapons that the coalition had banned as too terrible. She also watched the recordings of 2 million civilians being evacuated safely. Children who would grow up because humans had fought without mercy. Her report to the High Council was simple. The humans won in 17 minutes what we couldn't achieve in hours. They used weapons we consider immoral. They killed without hesitation. They are everything we evolved away from. She paused, then added, "And they are our only hope for survival." News of the Kepler Belt victory spread across the galaxy. Coalition citizens watched the recordings with mixed feelings. They were grateful to be alive. They were horrified by the methods used to save them. A new phrase entered galactic vocabulary: human warfare. It meant total destruction of the enemy. It meant using any weapon necessary. It meant winning at any cost. The galaxy had asked for help. The humans had answered. Now the galaxy had to decide if the cure was worse than the disease, because the warriors they had unleashed didn't fight to disable or contain. They fought to completely destroy. And the swarm was learning that for the first time in its existence it had met something more dangerous than itself.